what I think is necessary with this, what we'll call the psychedelic renaissance, is a cultural shift. It's a cultural shift where we are not just popping a pill and the pill is solving our problems, but we are working with our own psyche. But with the right tools, we want to take responsibility for our own healing. And that's the invitation in this cultural shift that I think psychedelics are hopefully going to help facilitate it.
I turned 50, y'all, and I started a podcast.
Really, age is just a number. It comes down to how we choose to live and the choices we make in our life, and those things accumulate.
Don't let the programming of life keep you from doing things every single day that make you happy.
When we feel good, it's easy to think good.
Life is not happening to you. You are your life. You are happening to your life. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we are tackling microdosing psychedelics for health optimization. And today, my guest is John Robert Downs. And John is an entrepreneur, an investor, and an advisor within the cannabis and psychedelic industries, and a peak performance and mindset coach specializing in integration and microdosing. He helps entrepreneurs, founders, executives, and creative high achievers transform and increase performance, ease suffering, and create lasting fulfillment by embodying their true purpose. He discovered plant medicine in 2015 and began his own personal healing journey, incorporating psychotherapy, men's work, microdosing, embodiment practices, and the deep study of philosophy, archetypes, and the neurobiology of optimal states of consciousness flow. Wow, that's a lot, John. You were up to some really, really interesting things.
Yeah, thank you. The bio doesn't exactly flow off the tongue when we think about all the different aspects that are coming together that helps inform my coaching. But I'm really grateful to be here with you today and to have the opportunity, Joanna, to speak with you and your audience. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. As we were just saying before we hit the record button, I think this conversation is really important because most people that I interact with, we are definitely not in the same circles. Our circles kind of overlap a little bit in the sense of, what we're involved in and what kind of people we're connecting with. But a lot of the people I'm connected with don't even have any understanding of what microdosing means. I mean, I think, you could guess from the name that it just means a small amount, but how much, what, why, what's the purpose, where does this conversation begin? And so I think it's a really important, distinctive conversation that we need to have. And I think you're the perfect person to have it with. And you can provide a lot of context as well. So what I want to start with is I'm sure people notice that in the news and in social media and in kind of the general, conversations that are happening around the world, there is a lot more talk about psychedelics. Mushrooms, specifically, I think, are really at the forefront. We've kind of checked off the box of cannabis, right? That was like the last 7 years. We went through that whole process.
Mhm.
And now the focus really has been changed to psychedelics such as psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And so it's coming up in news stories and articles and magazines and social media, as I said. So we're hearing about it. And what do you think? What is causing that resurgence? Why are we now, in the last however many years or months, having this conversation now as a
Mm.
culture?
Yeah, well, I think cannabis taught us a lot that over the last couple decades that we've seen legalization progress state by state, and the world hasn't ended, the sky hasn't fallen. But we've seen the
Hmm.
tip of the spear for having a conversation and having folks that have spent their entire lifetime propagandized by the war on drugs to have a conversation about why cannabis might be legalized. It comes down for medical reasons, for compassion, for end of life care, palliative care around cancer. And then, of course, there's a whole host of folks that we wouldn't even consider terribly sick or ill, but are somewhat healthy, but are trying to optimize their life. And they found that, a little bit of cannabis could be very beneficial in helping with that. And so this is a conversation that's been ongoing around alternatives to mainstream medicine for a couple of decades that has, in a sense, desensitized people to this idea that like, well, if it's a drug, if it's cannabis, it's bad, or if it's mushrooms or LSD or psychedelics, it's bad, which has been the standard refrain for the better part of 40 or 50 years. And so, as we've seen with cannabis continuing to progress and legalize, it started to open up conversations with people about the medical benefits of psychedelics. And I see that happening in a very global nature, just looking back and seeing. I also see it in my own life, where I was in the cannabis industry, just like you were, working to legalize this industry from prohibition to regulated.
Hmm.
And I started to
Hmm.
come in contact with people that, didn't seem like crazy hippies or, were going to run off into the hills because they'd done some mushrooms, but they were actually very caring and conscientious and kind, and some of the most beautiful people I'd ever met. And they were talking about how they had worked with these compounds, with psilocybin, for example, in their own healing and their own consciousness expanding journey. And so, just like a lot of people, myself, I came to these medicines really with a lot of fear and trepidation, and started to see that, well, because what they told me about cannabis wasn't necessarily true, and so maybe it's not
Hmm.
true what we're hearing about psilocybin. So against that backdrop, we have now 40, 50 years of anecdotal evidence of the benefits where mindfully used, psychedelics can be very powerful and impactful tools for personal and spiritual development and
Hmm.
growth. And so, against that backdrop, about 15 years ago, we started to see a resurgence in research looking at, from a clinical perspective, the impact on psilocybin and MDMA, and other classical psychedelics on PTSD, on addiction and depression and anxiety. And what we're learning is in the clinical studies is reinforcing what we all kind of seen from anecdotal, trip reports,
Hmm.
that these, in fact, used mindfully with the proper set and setting, can be very impactful, powerful medicines. And what we're also learning at the forefront of this movement is that you don't have to, take a big trip. You don't have to go on a huge journey to necessarily reap some of the benefits. You can do a microdose, which would typically be 10, 5 to 10% of what we would consider a full therapeutic or dose, where you're taking a trip. 5 or 10% of that, it's not perceptual. You're not affecting your vision. You're not affecting yourself in a way that you can't go on with your daily life and do all the things that you would normally do in the course of living. And so, with this microdosing now making psychedelics more accessible, there's a ton of interest because people are hearing from their
Hmm.
friends. They're seeing the clinical research of the impact, the positive impact of psychedelics in larger doses, and they're curious on what it can do for them. And it's an exciting time. It's a really exciting time because people are open to learning about this new realm of care.
Hmm. It is an exciting time. And you were talking about the clinical research that has been really accelerating. I think you said over the last 15 years. Has that been the time frame or so? But it really started what in the and I don't know the history really well, but I know that there was a lot of studies going on what in the 50s and the 60s. And then at some point, I think during what the Nixon administration, was it Nixon who like made everything, taboo and shut all the research down, and so there was this period of decades where the psychedelic research was stopped in its tracks and kind of frozen in time until it was kind of reopened, in the last decade and a half or
Yeah.
so.
And books have been written on this, and it's infuriating when we look at the political
Yeah.
decision to ban psychedelics. I mean, it was a result of really they escaped the lab. There was a ton of research happening in the 50s and 60s, around the positive
Mm-hmm.
impact of psilocybin and LSD, MDMA.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is when we saw the cultural movement of the 60s and the Summer of Love and Timothy Leary coming out and really just, saying psychedelics for everyone. This is, tune in,
Mm-hmm.
turn on, tune in, I can't even say tune in, turn on, drop out. But anyway,
Drop out.
this created a cultural movement, which of course, was, we all are very familiar with. But and
Yeah.
so that's what we focus on. If we're looking back at the history books, we see the Summer of Love, we see Woodstock, we see Timothy Leary. But what we forget about is the preceding couple of decades, the 50s and 60s, there was a ton of clinical research on the
Mm-hmm.
efficacy of
Mm-hmm.
psychedelics treating these conditions of PTSD, addiction in particular with LSD, depression, anxiety. And so that research went underground, and it was only happening
Yeah.
in very covertly, and there's a lot of very brave people
Mm-hmm.
that have continued to shepherd this movement
Mm-hmm.
forward over 40, 50 years of prohibition. And I just, my hat is off to them, and my heart breaks for
Mm-hmm.
everyone whose life has been affected, not by adverse reactions of psychedelics necessarily, but by getting caught
Right.
with them, by the state. And so what we're starting to see now,
Yep.
though, is that, especially coming out of COVID, as we see mental illness on the rise, we know that we're in a mental health crisis. We know that we're in a crisis of opioid addiction, with deaths rising rapidly. And so we're looking for answers. And so,
Right.
sometimes just like bell bottoms are going to go out of fashion and come back in, things that we might have seen previously that have gone out of fashion, now are coming back into vogue. And with good reason, because they really do truly work.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just trying to, wrap our heads around and understand this scientifically, under what modality. Does it have to always be a large dose? Could it be a mini dose or a micro dose? Are there different
Mm-hmm.
ways that we can work with these medicines that can facilitate healing and personal self-development?
Mm-hmm. Right. And what you're really speaking to is how can they work as medicine, right? As plant, well, not necessarily plant medicine. I mean, psilocybin is a plant, but LSD is lab created. But how these psychedelics can actually be medicine, and as you briefly mentioned, they can potentially have great efficacy, but very low side effects when you use them properly in the right, as you said, set and setting, which I think is really important because the psychedelics in general have been really demonized in our society and made to seem as if it's going to ruin your life and end your life and make you go crazy or whatever the things. It's all it's built up of really nothingness. I'm sure there are some side effects to some people in certain settings and all of that, just like anything. But um, I wanted to get back to what you were saying about the levels of microdose. You were mentioning 5 to 10% of a full like trip dose, and it would be considered a microdose. Is that the official definition of a microdose? 5 to 10% of a full dose.
That's the rule of thumb, and it's going to vary a little bit for each
Okay.
person. For some folks, it might be 5% of a gram, or 10% of a gram of mushrooms could be a right microdose, say 100 milligrams or 150 milligrams of dried psilocybin, cubensis mushrooms. And so, or, whereas a tab of acid, which is generally considered a full trip, would be 100 micrograms. A microdose of LSD might be 10 micrograms, which would be 10%. So once you get down into that
Mhm.
5 to 15% range, let's say around 10%, as our bullseye, each person has to adjust based on their own chemistry, how quickly they metabolize the medicine. There's a little bit well, there's a lot of individual, making sure that the dosage fits for the person. Some folks are more
Mhm.
sensitive, some folks are less sensitive. And the point is to find that dose that is subperceptual. You're not overtly affected, but you're feeling a mood enhancement. And I describe the desired effects to clients. You're looking for that feeling of when you heard your favorite song on the radio, the sun's on your face. You're excited and optimistic about your day. It's like you just kind of feel you have a
Mhm.
little extra boost, a little pep in your step. That's what
Mhm.
we can hope for when we're microdosing and we're in a good cadence with the medicine. Uh, and
Mhm.
so on the other hand, it doesn't mean that you're going to be side effect free when you're microdosing. In
Mhm.
fact,
Mhm.
the beautiful thing about psychedelics, I think in many instances is, the desired effect and the side effects are actually quite similar. You're just going to feel more feelings. You're going to have the energy of the medicine interacting with your own psyche. And so it could be that sometimes the feelings that you feel, it doesn't feel like your favorite song on the radio. It feels like a sad song. And now you're being called to sit with those feelings of, oh, I'm feeling sadness that's present here. It's not overwhelming. I'm not, depressed or crying or, wanting to jump in bed and not get out, but it's like I'm feeling that something is here. And so now we come into the importance of integrating even a microdosing experience. We all know the importance of integration when we sit in a ceremony or we're going to sit with a therapist who's going to guide us through a full journey with psilocybin or LSD or MDMA. We understand that we're going to go somewhere. We're going to, have that journey come back, go somewhere within our psyche, and then we're going to, try to bring back those lessons and integrate them into our life. And that's where the real work is. It's the journaling, it's the meditation, it's the mindfulness, it's all that stuff that grounds what we learn in that psychedelic space into our life that makes the big impact. But it's the same with microdosing. And so when someone is microdosing, it's still just as important to have practices in place to help integrate what it is that they're feeling through the course of a
Mhm.
microdosing protocol.
Oh my God, there was so much in what you just said that I was just enthralled with, and I want to unpack. Like, first of all, like, how would a person determine whether or not they would want to go the traditional dosing route? What do we want to call that? A macro dose, a standard dose? Uh, what is the term? What is the language for that? What do I
Well, let's
say?
define our terms. We've got microdose at the small end, and this
Uh-huh.
is that 5 to 10%. Then we have mini dose, which is where you're more than a microdose, so you're feeling the medicine a little bit more overtly in your system, but you're certainly not in a place where you're out of control or you're losing yourself in the medicine where you would need a trip sitter or a guide. This is where we would get into a more full macrodose, a full trip. And so there's a spectrum, there's a range microdose, mini dose, and then macrodose. And,
Okay. So go ahead.
yeah, and so how does somebody know if they should mini dose, microdose, macrodose? Like, what do I do, right?
Right.
Hey, I
Right.
always will tell my clients, like, first of all, like, what do you do when you meet somebody on the street? You shake your hand. You shake their hand before you kiss them. If you're romantically interested in this person, you're probably going to kiss them before you sleep with them. There's a natural progression where you're building rapport, you're building a relationship. And so I think it's the same thing with psychedelic medicines. It's like build a relationship with these medicines. Start with a microdose and feel what it feels like to have just a teeny tiny bit in your system and work with it for a while that way. And then maybe if you're feeling confident, take half a gram of psilocybin and go for a walk in nature. And, it's not so much that you can't still be completely coherent and, but you're going to feel a little bit more. You're going to, visually might, sense this felt sense, this ineffable sense that, well, obviously everything's alive around you, but that you're a part of it. And, that you might, feel it more
Mhm.
viscerally. And then ultimately, if you feel like there's more work to be done, more to uncover, then you can move more into a macro dose where you're sitting in a full ceremony, a full therapeutic dose. And then that's where you have to start to, bring in even more diligently the importance of having the right trip sitter, the right setting, the right intention, ensuring that you've been screened properly, that you don't have family health
Mhm.
history of bipolar or schizophrenia.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
psychedelics are not for everyone, right? So, let's be clear. We're
Right.
not advocating that everyone rush out and try psychedelics, whether it be a macro, mini, or microdose. What I'm saying is that, with the proper safety protocols in place, with the proper screening, and then after, the proper integration, these can be impactful. So to summarize, start low, go slow. Always good advice.
Mhm.
Dip your toe in the water
Mhm.
before you jump into the deep end of the pool. It would be my advice.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for that. And the clinical studies that have been going on and are currently going on, are those mostly in the macro dose level, where they're doing a macro dose of, let's say, psilocybin, for example, with a therapist, um, in what you're calling a trip sitter, and then doing the entry? Is that typically happening with a macro dose right now? The studies?
Yeah, most of the research is being done around full macro dose, larger doses. Exactly. There are some studies that have come out for microdosing, and they're inconclusive. Some are going to show that
Mm-hmm.
microdosers have better health outcomes, that they have lower anxiety, lower depression, better mood. So there have been some studies that point to the efficacy of microdosing, and there's been one big study that came out last year that said, you know what, it's all placebo effect. And
Right.
it's the power of the placebo, power of the mind to believe that this is helping you, but that's what it is. Well, the jury is out. And so far as what,
Mm-hmm.
clinically will come back with the research, and anecdotally user reports, so many people are benefiting. And if there is some placebo effect, I say, why curse the placebo effect? Ultimately,
Right.
there's something we call the law of reactivity, just where if you are paying attention to something, you will, even without necessarily setting a goal to improve it, just by paying attention and tracking, you'll start to
Mm-hmm.
improve. So if you begin a microdosing protocol, and with that microdosing protocol, you begin to pay attention to your sleep habits, pay attention to your diet, your
Mm-hmm.
hydration, your are you journaling, meditating, all these things. A lot of times people are
Mm-hmm.
very determined, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start microdosing and I'm going to do this as part of a overall health and wellness overhaul. I'm doing this to make a change. Nobody's microdosing just because, you're not taking a trip. There's nothing, really that exciting about it. It's just, it's a vitamin, it's a supplement. So why are you doing it? You're doing it for transformation. So when you're calling in that transformation, if there's some placebo there, if there's some intention, I say great. But I also suspect, based on my experience, that it's more than the placebo, and that the research will bear that out.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great analogy, or that of a supplement. It's like microdosing. Let's just say psilocybin is kind of like taking a supplement. Whether I take vitamin D, I take a B complex or and magnesium I take at night, whatever. And these things are not like silver bullets that are going to like change my life instantly, right? Pushes they're little pushes that help my body do what it wants to do naturally, but maybe better, maybe more easily. Like, as you mentioned, being in flow, being just it's like a nudge, right? And and the way you can look at it, especially specifically in the microdose, is like a supplement. And how can it enhance my physical and mental experience? I mean, that's kind of how I'm thinking of it. Would you say that's
Exactly right.
kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah. So what conditions, as a coach, what kind of conditions, again, once somebody's screened and you're getting to know somebody, what kind of things might someone be experiencing that microdosing might be helpful
Mhm.
for?
Yeah, well, mood enhancement, feeling more connected, feeling less anxiety, feeling less depression. And it's not just about um, repressing or suppressing anxiety or depression. It's about being more equipped to integrate those feelings into your life in a way that you can use that energy um, as fuel for transformation. And so that's the number one thing, is creating better context and feeling more equipped to handle the energy that our psyche puts forth, things that seem overwhelming. It could be the urge to drink alcohol at night, and in
Mm,
having the energy of the psilocybin in your system, for example, could give you the a little bit of that boost to say, you know what? I don't want that drink. I want to choose a different outcome. I want a different life, and holding that vision. So when people are typically working with me, it's not because they're so ill that they're trying to just get back to a healthy baseline, but rather I work with a lot of people that we would consider very functional high achievers. From the outside
Mhm.
looking in, they have it all. They're crushing life. And yet, when you peek behind the curtains, there might be a sense of sadness, or there might be a sense of emptiness or lack of purpose, or just feeling like, is this it? Can't there be more?
Mhm.
And so what we will work with the psychedelics, and certainly with microdosing, is to start integrating practices to develop right relation with all the feelings that are present, the good, the bad, the ugly, those that we might have been repressing or suppressing, and those that are now asking and inviting us to work with, so that again we can alchemize them into fuel for transformation. But it's across the board. I mean, I've seen it, people, like I said, depression, anxiety, lack of
Mhm.
motivation, lack of clarity
Mhm.
of purpose, and just
Mhm. Mhm.
it's really about living your best life. And it feels like that's what people ultimately want to do, is they want to individuate, they want to be the best that they can be. And I think these medicines can be one tool of many tools to be effective at helping facilitate that.
I love the way you've just described that and when you talk about mood and anxiety and depression and you look at what the alternative is, what people are doing. Well, they're either self-medicating with alcohol or some other, prescription benzodiazepine or something. They're either self-medicating or they go to their doctor and they're medicating with antidepressants, other kinds of anti-anxiety pills, which actually do
Hmm.
numb and hide the feeling. They dull it down. And they're addictive and they don't address anything about the root cause whatsoever. And it actually just, I mean, it might make you temporarily feel better. I don't know. I mean, but it's not addressing the underlying um, you know, issue. And, what you're talking about, what microdosing could look at is allowing you to be with these feelings and have them be a little bit more electric, not electric, that's not the right word, a little more present or a little more way for you to be able to be with them a little bit so that you can process and work through and check out and kind of swim in and um get to the other side. It's like a tool,
Hmm.
it's like an actual tool, as opposed to what a lot of our medical system is, which is a bunch of band-aids that cause additional wounds and additional side effects that then you need other band-aids for. It's like, you know so this is what I'm really fascinated about with microdosing psychedelics when you're talking about mood and anxiety and depression, because so many people, I don't know if antidepressants are it's got to be one of the top 5 prescribed medications in the United States. I mean, it feels like so many people are on antidepressants. And you know, this is such an amazing opportunity to take a completely different approach to, feelings,
Yeah, yeah,
and being. Go ahead.
yeah. What's coming up for me is I'm thinking about the Netflix series, How to Change Your Mind, which is based on the book by Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind. And
Mhm.
there's a scene in there where someone who's participating in the MDMA therapy describes his experience. And this is not a microdose, to be clear. This is, he's in a macro dose, he's in a therapeutic environment. But he says about the experience, I was able to go and be with sadness without being lost in the sadness. I could feel it without getting lost in it. And that's what we're hoping for, is to develop new relationships with feelings that are present. And it could be very old feelings, feelings that might even predate our conscious memories, that are dictating, how we respond and how we show up in certain situations. And so what happens when we're microdosing or when we're sitting with larger amounts of the medicine is we're hoping that we can um, uh, practice neuroplasticity, or we can create neuroplasticity. We can fire new neurons, and then with neurogenesis, and then new neural connections through neuroplasticity. And so this, this ability to stimulate parts of the mind that might be unused and not accessed, and to stimulate new neuronal connections, is happening in these full ceremonies with larger amounts of medicine. And so the hypothesis is that even at the very smaller amounts, the subperceptual amounts, when we have it in our system and we're working with it in our daily life, that will enable us to have a similar impact where we can be with the feelings, but not be with them in the same way, with the same relationship that we've habitually become adjusted to. And so, and to do so in a way that doesn't seem so intimidating or overwhelming, or um, doesn't foster so much shame and self-shame and judgment, right?
Mm.
So that's what's happening.
Mhm.
Is these feelings are an invitation, and the feelings are not
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
problem. They're a symptom. They are a symptom. They're a sign. They're an invitation to be played with and looked at, and that's what I think is necessary with this, what we'll call the psychedelic renaissance, is a cultural shift. It's a cultural shift where
Mhm.
we are not just popping a pill and the pill is solving our problems, but we are working with our own psyche,
Mhm.
with tools. And the tool doesn't have to be a psychedelic. A tool can be meditation. It can be, just
Yep.
simply being out in nature. It can be healthy lifestyle changes.
Yep.
But with the right tools, we want to take a responsibility for our own healing.
Oh,
And that's the
oh my
invitation
God.
in this cultural shift that I think psychedelics are hopefully going to help facilitate. And that's what I'm about bringing in, is telling. I tell every single one of my clients, I mean, I could probably get it stamped on my forehead, like, psychedelics won't work unless you do the work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish everything you just said was so like just I could feel it. I'm just loving everything that you just said in that statement. But feelings are an invitation. I mean, how beautiful is that? I mean, we in I feel like in our culture, we are, first of all, we're not given skills to deal with uncomfortable feelings. We're not given the tools of breathing, of meditation, of conversing with somebody we trust about our feelings, and that feelings are okay. And how about let's do some movement and let's whatever. Like there's so many tools to to be with and process and just really be with. But I love that feelings are an invitation, right? It's like you have the feeling, whatever, it's good, bad, or you don't even have to label it, whatever it's the feeling comes up, and it is an invitation to look at what is coming up for you and where what is that. And I love that, as you said, this is a cultural shift, and I see it as one too, away from the numbing and the shame and the escapism. Instead, looking at all of these tools where we can actually sit with it and be a little uncomfortable. I mean, can we as freaking human beings be uncomfortable for 5 minutes? Can you please? And it's okay. You're not going to die, to and I just love that. And then lastly, what you said about taking responsibility. I'm a huge, this is one of my big focuses, in my life, is thinking about and talking about how we are responsible for our reality and our experience and our healing. And like, we have so many tools available to us, and microdosing psychedelics is a burgeoning area where I'm hoping we're going to, as a society, going to be able to utilize these therapies, legally at some point, and incorporate it into our sense of responsibility,
Mhm.
for our life, instead of giving up our responsibility to physicians, from traditional medical school or to government or large, governmental health organizations. Like, what is
Mm,
that even? So, I mean, that was just so beautiful, John, and what a great explanation, and how microdosing can be, used as a tool. And I also, you kind of answered the question I was going to ask you, which is, what is the working theory as to why microdosing works? And I think that's beautiful what you said, that by a little bit at a time, you're able to kind of let it create, let it settle into you,
mhm,
and just let it kind of do its magic a little bit, as long as you're doing the
mhm.
work. I think that's, you know, so important. Anything else you want to add just about this piece of the conversation?
Well, this piece of the conversation is so important because ultimately, if we don't take responsibility for ourselves and our own healing, you, we're always, going to be at the whims of that which is beyond our control. And I think the most empowering belief is to believe that we are responsible for our own healing and that we are our own gurus. And so I think, again, just to reiterate, if you pop a psilocybin microdose and sit in front of the TV and binge watch, old episodes of Cheers, you're not going to see a lot of growth. You're not going to see a lot of transformation that you might be trying to call in. And I love old episodes of Cheers, but there's a time and a place for it, and there's a time and a place for your healing. And ultimately, when people are undertaking a microdosing protocol, it is typically what we're seeing is it is in conjunction with clear intentions to bring about some positive transformation in their life. And there's no no toxicity known for LSD. And by the way, you said earlier psilocybin is a plant. I mean, psilocybin is a fungus, and I know you know that, but it's I don't want you to get any angry hate mail from the
Yes,
mushroom
sorry,
lovers
sorry.
out there. And so and I think
Yeah,
LSD. It's important to note that it is a synthesized fungus. It's the ergo fungus. Which grows on wheat, and so very similar qualities, but also some key differences between those two medicines. But when people are sitting down and they're microdosing with them, these are non-toxic, safe substances, and again, the effects at these doses are subperceptual. It's not overt. And so, I know what's brought us together in our friendship was our support for microdosing and to support legalizing microdosing and to support, taking this idea that we have to look outside of ourselves or to someone in a white lab coat, to heal us, and rather so we can take responsibility for our own healing. And in that paradigm shift where we say we're going to take responsibility for our own healing, we have these tools that are safe, that are
right.
non-toxic, that are not, going to put you out of sorts where you can't do everything that you would normally do in your normal workday, whether it's, talk to your boss or watch your kids or drive your car. And they're powerful and impactful. And we're only starting to learn exactly how they work in the mind, and all that research is underway. But we do know with a pretty large body of evidence that they're safe. And for that reason,
Right.
there's no societal reasons, no reason from a safety standpoint, health and safety standpoint of either the person who's microdosing or the people around them, why this should not be a legally allowed practice. And I think that's really important to put out into the space, is that we have to advocate and fight for that right now. Otherwise, what is going to happen is we are going to see the same old paradigm from Western healthcare applied to what we see here in this resurgence in psychedelic health. And that is, you got to go through the gatekeeper, you got to, be in a clinic, you got to have it administered from someone who, has gone to medical school. And that's just not how the psychedelic ecosystem has existed for the last 50 years. And what we've seen is in a more underground or even indigenous or traditional culture is we see a culture and support amongst the community, and we see the fabric of the community that holds people together, these small groups that get together for healing circles and integration
Mm.
groups, and traditional communities, this is what facilitates the healing, is the connection. And the more we're understanding about addiction and depression, it's about not feeling connected to people and the world around you. And that's one of the key takeaways, of sitting in a ceremony with psychedelics, is you're like, holy cow, I, in a very real, visceral, and yet ineffable sense, feel more connected to the world around me than I ever have. And that in and of itself, addresses the root of depression as opposed to simply masking the symptoms such as an SSRI. So, a long-winded way of me saying that I think the point is that personal accountability is so important, and having conversations around the paradigm shift that we need, where people are, again, taking accountability for their own health and healing, and psychedelics helps foster and support that conversation.
I mean, I absolutely love what you said about connection. I also agree with you that I think the cause of much of our suffering in society is our disconnection to community, disconnection to the earth, disconnection to others, and also disconnection to our own bodies. I believe that is the source of probably much of the disease and evil of the world, is this sense of disconnection. Um, and the way the benefits that we're talking about that you can get from microdosing psychedelics, it's like there are so many benefits, so many potentially life-changing, beneficial, transformative benefits, and literally zero potential negative side effects, that it's like it is mind-boggling that this is just not fast-tracked to legalization. It is so frustrating, and I know you feel frustrated as well, as to why these substances continue to be classified as what, I don't even know what the classification is, but it's like the same as heroin, right? I mean,
Right.
it's totally illegal, and it doesn't make any sense.
And the more we know, the less sense it makes. And for people that even have to say, well, we need more research, we don't really know. Well, actually, we do, because we can go back to the 50s and 60s and see thousands of research studies and clinical trials that were done at that time, and we know that the efficacy is real. And it makes sense from a political perspective, and certainly from a cultural perspective. It's what Terence McKenna said. These compounds, psychedelics, are not illegal because the government's trying to protect us. They're illegal because you know, they dissolve, um, they dissolve traditional structures and allow us to ask questions and to see, different paradigms. I'm butchering his quote. I mean, that's a very loose paraphrase, but it's, ultimately they are dangerous to established hierarchies. And, I think we'd all agree that there are some hierarchies in our world today that, need to be reevaluated. And I think we're in the process of doing that. And of course, from a societal cultural perspective, that's always a long and painful and arduous process, it seems. But I do think that psychedelics and an awakening that can occur in conjunction with this psychedelic renaissance, if you will, is that it could help speed that process in a way that's beneficial for all of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, we're not trying to understate this at all, you and I. We're not trying to understate that this is like can change the world, like change the world type stuff.
But
Like,
only if we change ourselves. And that's the place to start. And I think that's, super important to underscore. That is, yes, let's not understate anything. Let's be bold, and let's be loud and brash, let's turn it back around on ourselves and focus, like, where can I do the work? I can do the work on myself.
well, that's it. You have to have the focus on yourself. I mean, that's it. It's like, know that this is possible, that this cultural shift, this societal shift is possible on a macro level. And then right away, just look at yourself right now. And then that's your job.
Yeah.
Your job is you, with the awareness of how that will affect the collective.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, okay, I know people are going to want to know what you're talking about, as far as what you're talking about, a microdosing protocol, a schedule, a coach. Can you explain what these things are so people are aware?
Sure. A protocol is what medicine am I taking? How much am I taking? How often am I taking it? How long am I taking it? So it's just a schedule is what a protocol is. And I think it'd probably be helpful for anyone that's interested in microdosing to know that for psilocybin, there's a couple of different protocols that are standard. Paul Stamets, who's a famous mycologist, developed a protocol called what he calls the Stamets stack. But the schedule is, in essence, to take psilocybin for 4 days in a row and then take 3 days off, and to repeat that schedule for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And so that would be one way that you would administer psilocybin in a microdosing protocol. Now, LSD, which is another very popular, and let's just talk about LSD and psilocybin because those are the two most popular compounds to microdose. LSD, you develop a tolerance very quickly. It comes into your system, and if you use it one day, the second day you'd have to do a lot more to feel the same effect. So from a microdosing perspective, doing it 4 days in a row doesn't make a lot of sense. And so James Fadiman, who's a psychedelic researcher and author, wrote the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, which is a fantastic read, has a ton of research harkening back to the 50s and 60s. And he developed what's called the Fadiman protocol. And it's primarily for LSD, but sometimes people will do this for psilocybin as well. But with LSD, do 1 day on, 2 days off, 1 day on, 2 days off, and then repeat that for 4 to 6 weeks. And that would be a protocol that someone could implement when they want to work with LSD in a microdosing fashion. So those are two protocols. Other protocols that exist would be every other day. Taking a day off and then taking another one, and then there's something called intuitive protocol, where someone might just microdose just when they feel like it, and not necessarily have a set schedule. One piece of advice that I give to all my clients, and I'd tell to all your listeners, is I believe that microdosing on a strict schedule is the most impactful way to see positive benefits accumulate in your life. I think there's a compound effect when you are working with a medicine consistently. It feels like after 2, 3, 4 weeks, you really start to gain additional accrual of benefit that you don't get when you're just microdosing haphazardly. And what I found is, if you're just intuitive in your microdosing, what happens is sometimes we select these days that aren't very difficult or arduous for us to microdose. So I'll give you an example. It's like I had a client. She's like, well, I just kind of microdose when I feel like it. Like if I'm taking the dog to the dog park, and it's like, okay, cool. Like you're not really growing if you're taking your dog to the dog park on a microdose. So you might have a great experience. You might feel really good, might feel nice. But what we know is in optimal human performance, growth occurs at an edge. And edges are sharp, or they could be sticky, but they're difficult at the edges. And when we microdose on a strict schedule, and then we go about our day, we give the presentation at work, we are hanging with the kids, we're doing everything that we have to, we're writing the report or whatever it is. And if we're doing that when we're microdosing, we're giving ourselves a chance to really be at our edge, to grow at our edge. And that's when I think the benefit of the medicine is most pronounced, because that's where you can push past maybe those old neuronal connections and start to develop new ones. Neurogenesis and neuroplasticity starts to take hold. So you only get that if you are consistent in your protocol and actually taking the medicine consistently, as opposed to just deciding when to do it haphazardly, in which case it feels like it's more of a recreational outcome, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
diligent growth.
And you work as a coach. Can you explain what that means? What is your role as a coach, and how does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of my coaching is just making sense of the experience, whether it be a full experience where someone has been guided into a full ceremony type. They've sat with 3, 4, 5 grams of psilocybin, or if it's just a microdosing experience, there's still a lot to integrate. And so what is the framework for that integration? For me, it's understanding the latest on the neurobiology and neuroscience of flow and how to get into flow states. Flow is just an optimal state of awareness where you perform and feel your best. It's like being in the zone, is another name for it. And what we've learned is that if you get your biology to work for you, and you're kind of checking the boxes of things that need to be checked in order to get into that state, then you can reliably produce flow states, and you can feel and perform better, and push past boundaries of what you thought might be possible for yourself. So when someone is in a state where they're looking to work with tools as powerful as psychedelics, they're in a state of calling in transformation and growth. And so I'm helping create the context around the work that they're doing with psychedelics through the framework of how to get into flow states. Then also, I'm heavily influenced by depth psychology, Carl Jung. What we realize is
Mm,
scientists will tell us 90 to 95% of our daily actions are driven by habit, which is another way of saying that it's just
mhm,
driven by our unconscious, right? Our unconscious has an
mhm,
enormous impact on our life. And in the work of Carl Jung, it he explores the importance of making the unconscious conscious, because if you don't, you know, forever will it rule your life and you'll call it fate. And so in this work where we are making the unconscious conscious through our work with psychedelics, we want to make sense of what we're feeling, and the revelations that we're having. And many of the revelations, if you will, or many of the feelings and energies from our unconscious are not specific only to us. In fact, they are universal. They are universal across mankind in every culture, tradition, society, and civilization. And this is our collective unconscious. And so these themes, these what are called archetypes, are really important to understand and then explore and to bring in as a reference for developing understanding around what's coming up in the unconscious, because then you can alchemize that energy again into energy for transformation. So that's another big part of what I'm doing with my clients, is that making the unconscious conscious, and providing context for the bitter and the sweet in life that's happening
mm,
right now, in this beautiful journey. And I mean, intuitively, that's kind of what I do. I could go on and on, but I'll stop
mhm.
there for
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah, no, I think that it's such, I mean, it seems to me this must be like a new field, a new profession. I mean, to be, a microdosing coach and to lead people through their journeys and their transformation. And how wonder I mean, I think with anything in life, if you want to maximize your impact on anything you're doing, always work with a coach. It's like you're going to get the most out of personal training with a coach, or um if you want to learn how to sing, you're going to get a coach, or really play a wonderful instrument. And it's like this is an awesome opportunity, especially for people who this is all new to them, to have somebody just hold their hand through this experience and guide them and lead them and hold space, right? Just
Mhm.
create a container that they can experience this in, and help them process things that maybe they're not used to dealing with or processing. So what a wonderful gift you are, to I'm sure so many people. Um, it's kind of, I'm sure people are when they're listening to this, they're going to be thinking, wait a minute, all this is illegal. Like, how is this even possible? How are people, you know, microdosing with psilocybin I mean, we should at least address the fact that there are many, I don't know if it's millions, but there's many people working with psychedelics at the microdose and the mini dose and the macrodose, and it's illegal. So could you just address simply like how people, it's an underground thing, right? People just the way they used to get weed when weed was illegal. I don't know, or they grow it themselves, or what?
A lot of
How
people, yeah. I
what's
mean, it's community, and what we see are these,
yeah.
networks that you know somebody that's, people know people, and they find the medicine, and what you're looking for. Oftentimes, when you start to look, it'll appear when you're ready. And so,
Mm, mm.
there's an enormous amount of interest in psychedelics for all the reasons that we spoke about earlier in the podcast. And, people are doing their homework and they're going out and they're trying to find it, and they are. And then when, some of them then are not just taking matters into their own hands, but are working with coaches or guides or facilitators or healers, to help get the most out of the experience. And that's where I come in. So I just want to help people. I believe firmly in developing the culture around use of psychedelics to be one of harm reduction, safety, and transparency. And so, I'm here to, my heart called me to this
Yeah.
profession. And I'm used to walking people through financial transactions and, getting businesses financed and helping entrepreneurs raise money. And, that's what I always done my entire career, is business and corporate development. And so for me, I just realized it's a process, whether we're walking through a financial transaction or a transaction, so to speak, where we're trying to develop ourselves to be more than we currently
Hmm.
are, to have higher levels of happiness, satisfaction, joy, fulfillment. It's a process. Everything's a process. Even a a psychedelic experience. We sometimes think we put so much emphasis on the ceremony. The singular experience where we sit with the medicine. But even then, it's a process. It's a process of integration, and that process oftentimes looks like work. But there's ways to work smarter, not harder. There are frameworks for understanding expanded realms of consciousness, and that's what I try to do, is just bring that into the awareness of my clients and help guide them through this for their own benefit.
Hmm.
And
So it's
I'm
currently
not advocating that anyone do anything illegal. So,
absolutely
I mean,
not.
if
No,
you do
we
that,
are
that's your
neither.
decision. I'm not saying that anybody should do anything,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying psychedelics are for everybody. Certainly, I'm not, painting a broad brush saying psychedelics for all. Like, absolutely not. I think it's really important to have discernment and around if these might be good tools for you.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to echo your statement. I'm not advocating that people do anything illegal as well, and also I do not believe that any medicine is is right for everyone. That would be crazy to think any medicine would
Mhm.
be appropriate for every person. As you mentioned earlier, everything is individualized as it should be. Our nutrition, our exercise schedule, our self care program, and any medicines, whether they're natural medicines or whether they're in the lab or whether they're doctor prescribed, should all be very, very carefully considered. And what we are talking about, these are illegal. So, um, but it is happening. So we are just talking about what is in fact happening in the world and shedding some light to it, which I think is so important. Now, talking about the illegality, the way we met is through an organization called the Microdosing Collective, which is a nonprofit organization with the goal of well, ultimately to legalize microdosing, and access and education to the benefits of microdosing, psychedelics. And you've been a part of, can you share about your experience with that organization and what you're up to?
Yeah, the organization, I became involved about 6 months ago. I know the founders and kind of came in to help as an advisor to help stand up what is, I think, a very valiant and timely effort to create a community around microdosing so that we can advocate for regulations that make sense and incorporate how microdosing and how psychedelic use is occurring in the world today. What we don't want to see happen is these tools are locked in clinics and can only be accessed by people with insurance, and only with clinical conditions that call for maybe large doses, macro doses. What we see is that microdosing can be a very impactful tool, and so we want to advocate for over-the-counter microdosing supplements to be available. We want to advocate for regulations that make sense. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we're in the middle of our founding membership drive right now and our year-end fundraise. Our hope is to, not only educate the public on why these regulations are needed and why microdosing can be impactful, and to develop research to further finance and develop the research that's already occurring around microdosing, but then also to be able to have conversations with lawmakers and regulators about, hey, this is what your constituents want. I mean, this is how we can make the biggest impact and do the best good in the world, is by incorporating microdosing into any psychedelic legalization framework.
That's awesome. It's such an important organization. I feel so lucky to be a part of it. And I encourage anyone that's interested in just learning more about what is happening in the world of microdosing psychedelics, legal, the health benefits. Well, I'll put the link in the show notes to find the Microdosing Collective, and obviously information about how to find you, more information about what you do. And also, there's an awesome podcast called Into the Multiverse, which is kind of how I even heard about um, the Microdosing Collective, and then how I met you. So I'm going to put that in the show notes as well, because that's a really, really cool podcast. That's like everything mushrooms. And really everything psychedelics, but it's mostly focused on mushrooms and just every aspect. If you really want to just learn about this fungus, as I was corrected, um, you could check that out as well. So what, as we close here, John, what else do you think, is there anything else you want to put out there in the world right now about what we're up to, or what you're up to, or what's going on with this subject?
Support the Microdosing Collective. Joanna, I'm so glad that you jumped in with both feet and became a founding member, and your support means a lot to us. I appreciate you, carrying the banner, even beyond your support of the organization, just having me on the podcast and, having these conversations in your communities. You said earlier that, we have some overlapping community, but then also, we run in different circles. But whether it's my circle, your circle, or someone who's listening, there are people that are engaged in healing and, want to live more fulfilling, happier, more enjoyable lives. And, we have the ability as trailblazers in this space to help shape the culture that is going to inform, what this healing process can look like. And these decisions are being made right now, with Colorado recently passing Prop 122, legalizing or decriminalizing psychedelics and setting in path regulations for clinical plant medicine administration. I mean, there's a ton of opportunity right now. Oregon did it last year. So over the next few years, more states are going to be putting in place frameworks for legal psychedelics. And we need to be, having these conversations about what this ecosystem is going to evolve into, what this industry might look like, and how it's going to best serve the interests of all stakeholders. And so I just appreciate you for having that conversation. I would tell anyone out there, to go out and support the Microdosing Collective. Microdosingcollective.org is our website. It's a great resource for education. It's a great resource for community. We're hosting events in different cities and building awareness and momentum for our cause. And we would love for any of your listeners to be involved. Go sign the manifesto. Even if you don't want to donate anything, you can just sign the manifesto and pledge your support that perhaps microdosing has been impactful for you. And these statements of support all help. We're building momentum, building a movement. So I think that's my message. It's just get involved.
Awesome. John, thank you so much. Thank you for your commitment to not only your own growth, but the transformation of other people and the utilization of the tools, all the tools that we have access to, and just being a stand for that in the world. And I look forward to, having more conversations in the future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.